This is take 2 for me for filming this video. I filmed it and then realized that my sound had cut out at a certain point. I was definitely not paying attention, so my apologies for that, which I'm apologizing, I guess, more to myself here because you're just gonna see this one. So I apologize for having to do this, or not really having to, but doing this. Okay, so hello, welcome to the Quiet Riot. Thank you for joining me here today. If you are new here, this is where we talk film, television, and media. I am so happy to have you, and if you are a new subscriber, thank you, welcome. I'm glad you decided to stick around, and I'm just really appreciative of anybody who clicks on this video, watches the video, if you comment, like, if you're a subscriber, whatever, if you watch one video, if you watch every video, I'm appreciative of you all. It's definitely cool to be able to share my love of older films, and whether I'm, sharing some of my own specific criticisms or just talking about general criticisms that is leveled towards a film. It's fun, it's interesting for me because it's something that I could talk about for ages, and so to be able to just like sit in front of a camera and talk to it and maybe have some people watch it and or listen to it and are interested in my own thoughts and opinions, interested in what I have to say and share. It means a lot. So thank you. Thank you very much. If you are new here, you may not know that in the description box below, there is my social medias. As I'm making this video, I'm having some trouble with my website because I have switched where what is it? Like the host site, is that it? Is that what it's called? So I changed that and I am unable, so you're gonna not get there because it's no longer on Wix, but I'm figuring that out at the moment. Maybe when this video is up, I will have that figured out, but you can find that all in the description box below, as well as any of my sources can be found there, clips used, all that jazz, so you can check those out if you want to. In today's video, we are discussing Lifeboat, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, from a script by Joe Swerling that was adapted from a story by John Steinbeck. And this film is a wartime thriller that takes place in a lifeboat on the ocean following a German U-boat attack on a ship carrying both American and English civilians and the Marines. This film is one of 4 single or limited location films that were released over a 10-year period, beginning in 1944 with this movie. If you haven't heard of this before, I'm not surprised. This is definitely an underrated film of Hitchcock's, but I am here to ask the question, is this Hitchcock's most underrated film? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have any, I'd love to hear from you, and it also helps me in the algorithm. Not gonna lie, not gonna sugarcoat that, it does help me out. And let's go, let's talk about Lifeboat and ask the question, is Lifeboat Hitchcock's most underrated film? Over a period of 10 years, Hitchcock released 4 films set in limited locations, beginning with Lifeboat, released in 1944. His only film with 21st Century Fox, Lifeboat follows a group of stranded survivors after their boat was hit by a German submarine. While the film wasn't a huge success upon its release, Lifeboat has been reassessed in the 80 years since. Featuring a handful of character actors and theater greats, Lifeboat's one location allows theater actors Canada Lee and Tallulah Bankhead to show their stuff. Unfortunately for Lee, he had to put in extra work to make Joe more than an Uncle Tom type. He removed words like yes sir, no sir, and made further changes that gave the character depth. Now, this is something that is fairly common at this time, and this was more allowed to Black men than it was to Black women, especially darker skinned Black women. And it really breaks my heart though that any non-white actor not getting their chance to really shine in front of the camera. There's so much that we didn't get to see from Canada Lee, and I as much as I don't want to go back to another time because I know how bad it is, I would love to see Canada Lee take the stage, as well as other actors like William Marshall, Paul Robeson, and just see what they had to offer on stage. But we do get a little snippet of that here with Canada Lee portraying Joe, who is a very sympathetic character and a character that's easy to love as a human being. But a lot of the criticisms leveled against this film have to do with the character of Joe, and they're very valid criticisms regardless of who they're coming from. The film did undergo rewrites from Ben Hesh, who you've definitely heard me mention before on this channel and will probably hear me mention him again. He did a lot of scripts himself, but he also was involved in a lot of rewrites of these films. I recently found out that he is a horrible person, or he ended up being a horrible person, and I didn't have to say that, but I ended up saying that because it's on my mind. Hitchcock directs a cast of 8. They appear as English and American civilians, service members, and U.S. merchant marines, all of whom are trapped on a lifeboat when their boat is torpedoed by a German U-boat. A wartime thriller, Lifeboat deals with the fear of being caught by an enemy ship, being isolated in the ocean, and all that comes with it. One of the main criticisms that is leveled against the film is the portrayal of the German character. Now, this German character, if you've seen the film before, turns out to be more than what he initially says he is. He's saying that he's just a low-level worker on the ship, so in that case, he's more so connecting to Joe and other workers on the ship as well, trying to gain their sympathies, and they're of course more likely to help them, but he ends up gearing them to a German ship. That is of course going to be the American and English people's worst fear here. And in my personal opinion, I do not want my villain, whether I'm the one writing it, directing it, or watching it, to be one note, because that is boring as hell. Now, of course, there are situations, whether it's in Hollywood or elsewhere, where it also happens in books a lot, where people will find certain sympathies with far-right groups and just general hate groups, be it that Nazis, KKK members, and anything like it, and find certain ways to make them sympathetic in which they don't need to be seen that way. And I mean so much so in the fact that they're romantic figures. You'll find them in interracial relationships, or just generally relationships in which they would be of harm to that specific person. There's no need for that. There's absolutely no need for that. But that's not what we're dealing here with in Lifeboat. The German character, and we'll discuss this a little bit more later, is a human being, and even if they are, from of course our perspective, an evil person, it's still important to acknowledge the fact that they are a person, because that also acknowledges the things that they can truly end up doing. It also just makes them a lot more interesting, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. In 1944, America's enemy could only be portrayed in one particular way, and this was mainly due to the Hays Code and just a lot of the criticisms that one may face from the audience at the time. While we can of course understand the reason for making the German character appear not so different from the American English characters, they still couldn't seem to grapple with this, and they struggled to understand the portrayal of the character. Lifeboat was originally going to be shot in Technicolor and feature an all-male cast of unknowns. Thankfully, they made the decision to add 3 female characters, though it technically ends up just being 2. There is a very sad situation, and this film does deal with some very serious subject matter in terms of the unaliving of oneself and the death of a child. So in many aspects, this film is even more serious than you might go in thinking. I do think that adding a more diverse, having this film be more diverse in more ways than one, certainly adds even more so to what I believe are some of the messages that this film may be trying to get across. Tallulah Bankhead, who had not appeared in the film since 1932, was primarily a theater actress, and she ended up being paid $75,000 which equates to 1.2 million today. So she got paid very well. Kenneth Lee, who primarily worked in theater himself, was the first actor cast. His character Joe was not received well by the NAACP and other groups and critics, but he was portrayed by his performance. Historian Rebecca Skarloff noted that Joe was also depicted as compassionate, dependable, and heroic, the only cast member stepping forward to disarm the second German sailor rescued. Joe, I do think it's more, I don't know. I don't know if it's easier for me because of course I am white to see these better aspects of this character. Maybe it's also that I kind of know the history and I know who Canada Lee is, and I know what he did to bring it into this movie. But I unfortunately feel that a lot of the criticisms that are leveled towards this film and the character Joe kind of overrides the performance of Canada Lee and the more positive aspects of the character. And I would say that Skarloff got it right when she said he's proves to be more compassionate. He is able to see the more complexities in a person, and I also see where that can be seen as how a Black character can be put in the role of putting themselves in danger to save or further protect a white body, and how a Black body is constantly put in danger. So I don't want to overlook those criticisms in saying that they're not valid in any sense. I just want to give Canada Lee his flowers and recognize some of the more positive aspects of this character as well. All of the actors in this film gave great performances, but unfortunately, Hume Crone, who is originally Canadian, plays an English character in this, and he rivals Dick Van Dyke in having a really bad English accent that's hard to listen to. But I would also say that I find it a lot easier to listen to Dick Van Dyke's English accent than it is Hume Crone's here. If you haven't seen the film, I don't want that to cause you not to watch it, but I think it is important to mention that because it is hard to unhear. It sounds more like someone doing a very bad Australian accent. Something I really love about this movie is its lack of score. There is only a score at the beginning of the film and at the film's end, and this was definitely praised by critics. Critics were really fond of this. And while music can often add suspense to a film, here the lack of music adds that suspense. I find horror films and thrillers, when they use nature and film the sounds that are surrounding, it adds to a level of thrill and suspense that it just adds something. It adds to that feeling of, oh, it adds to a really realistic feeling. It adds to that realistic, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Hitchcock dismissed the idea of having music in a film about people stranded at sea by asking, where would the orchestra come from? Hugo Freidhofer is said to have asked in reply, where would the camera come from? And yes, Hugo Freidhofer, I completely understand where you're coming from in your little where would the camera come from, but let's also be very real here. There is this sense of being an audience member. You're watching a movie and you can, one, feel as if you're there, or feel as if you're being a voyeur. And the way you either choose to use music or not use music, or any kind of score to your advantage. And so I think in terms of Lifeboat and some other films who go this route, it adds to a certain amount of intensity. And in this case, it adds to that suspense. And when it comes to suspense, Hitchcock is the master. And I think we should maybe listen to him a bit here. I have my criticisms of Hitchcock, yes, but I also have my praise. And I will give praise where praise is due. And it's in Hitchcock's knowledge of how to add a lot of suspense to a film. During the making of the film, cast and crew became sick and hurt. Actor Murray Alfred was replaced by William Bendix when he became ill after 2 weeks of filming. Arthur Miller was replaced by Glenn McWilliams as director of photography when he became ill. Bankhead got pneumonia twice while filming, and Mary Anderson became seriously ill during shooting, causing the film to be further delayed. Hume Crone nearly drowned when he was caught under a water activator meant to cause waves for a storm. He came out with 2 broken ribs after a lifeguard saved him. One of the craziest things when watching a film, and I mean, I'm sure, like, regardless of how much you know about the history of film, you know that certain things are going to be a lot safer today than they were back then. And you know certain things that they did and just the things that they didn't have in place to make sure that actors were safe or even crew were safe. It blows my mind. And thankfully they had a lifeguard here, but going so far back as to know, like, the stunts that just different actors did in comedy for comedic effect. It's insane to me. As we had previously stated, at the time of the film's release, the film was criticized for what many thought was a sympathetic portrayal of its German character. In response to this criticism, Hitchcock said, "I always respect my villain, building him into a redoubtable character that will make my hero or thesis more admirable in defeating him or it." Bankhead defended the director by saying, "Hitchcock wanted to teach an important lesson. He wanted to say that you can't trust the enemy. In Lifeboat, you see clearly that you can't trust a Nazi, no matter how nice he seems to be." When we are first introduced to the character, we are led to believe that he is a low-level employee and he doesn't have a lot of stake in, they're not going to care about him as much as they would someone else, say a captain, which he turns out to be. And this can play on a lot of things, and you can have the criticism of, oh, they're saying that he should have just been thrown off the boat, you shouldn't have trusted him. But I think a good lesson here is to state that a person can really play onto your sympathies, but it's also important to just recognize and take note of the fact that this person could be a danger to you. Keep a good eye on them. Maybe not listen to them entirely here. But it also goes to show at the end when there is still this, they're still able to have a certain amount of sympathy and a nature towards the young German guy that they find in the waters, who is very young, and I think it just adds to, maybe in certain cases, being a little too, I don't know, it's hard to say because I also don't want to say that, like, oh yeah, I don't want to get into this very, like, American and English superiority area either. So from either side that you're on, there's going to be looking at someone as the bad guy or the enemy, and of course in this case, Nazis bad. Nazis always bad. They're bad, no matter who they are. And in this case, a lot of these people are, some of them civilians, some of them not. And I think there is a lot of what film, particularly under censorship, needed a very black and white look at a situation. And I think that Lifeboat does a good job at doing away with that nonsense and recognizing that some things just are not black and white here. There is definitely innocence to be seen on both sides, but there's definitely some bad shit to be said on both sides, but kind of in the situation. Oh my god. Nazis are always bad, and innocent people can be caught up in the BS. Because of the film's controversies, the marketing budget was reduced and the film was given a limited release. This likely led to the low box office for the film. 21st Century Fox was also really mad because they ended up going over budget, everything kept getting pushed back, they were not supposed to film as long, and Hitchcock was originally going to do another film with 21st Century Fox, but because of all this hoopla, that didn't end up happening. In later years, Lifeboat has received a new life on the shelves of Blockbuster and other rental stores. Long live Blockbuster. The film finally received the praise it deserved, and there was more understanding to the film's character portrayals and story execution. While there is still something to be said for the character of Joe, it's important to note that the work Canada Lee put into the film to make Joe more than a one-note character. In the characterization, Lee's Joe was a strong-willed character with more layers than one might expect from the film. While Lifeboat earned its criticism, the film also earned its praise. Many of the reviews in recent years focus on the confined nature of the films and the challenges that come with it. Both writing and directing a limited location film comes with a certain set of challenges. How does one make a film in one location interesting? It comes with the knowledge that being stranded in the ocean after a shipwreck is terrifying, but what does come next? There is more to Lifeboat than stranded people on a lifeboat. There is the reality of the time period and the question of what if the person who saves us is the enemy. In some cases, the script could have been expanded on to show the individual fears of its characters. A modern audience may find the lack of action hard to sit through. Nowadays, we have a lot more films that really pack in the action, pack in the adventure, and that is where they spend most of their time on the whole execution process. And this is not to say that's said for every film and every person in the audience. Just certain audience members may find the slower nature of this film difficult to sit through. Lifeboat isn't for everyone. It isn't even for every Hitchcock fan. But the film does a good job at presenting the situation and recognizing the multiple dangers involved. Today, the film is listed among Hitchcock's most underrated film, and I would go so far as to say yes, this is Hitchcock's most underrated film. In spite of all of the criticisms leveled against it, it has something to say. And maybe it couldn't say everything that Hitchcock or Joe Swerling or John Steinbeck wanted to say in this movie, but it was there. And we as a modern day audience can still decipher the messages. While the film may not conjure up some of the same feelings as his more popular film, Lifeboat still manages to bring levity to a dark situation. Some of the criticisms leveled at the film by John Steinbeck, who wished to have his name removed from the film, didn't like what he believed to be slurs against organized labor, and didn't like the depiction of Joe, believing his version of the character was better. We don't know what his version of the character was like, and his feelings on the matter are valid. Sometimes, though, I think the criticisms of Joe overshadowed the praise that actor Canada Lee deserved. Joe could be more fleshed out character with a larger, more active role in the film, but Canada Lee's incredible performance brings Joe more depth, and that's important to acknowledge. What I think stands out most in Lifeboat is the depictions of the various different relationships and how different characters connect. I would have liked certain prejudice to be more highlighted in this film, but there are specific moments, such as the character at Rittenhouse admiring Joe's family when he sees them and he's talking about them, and you kind of get to know them a little bit more, but he still refers to him as George, as in Pullman Porter George. So he's still not acknowledging every aspect of who he is based on both, preconceived notions and his prejudice regarding both race and class, because he is a wealthy person and Joe is a working class black man. And these things could have been highlighted a lot more and a lot better, but this was made during the 1940s during the Hays Code, so certain things had to certainly be whitewashed and just, generally not focused on in the ways that they should. But I do, for what it's worth, what they were able to do in terms of discussing class and gender and race and just individual prejudice, I found that to be very interesting. I don't know, there's certain things that they did a really good job at showcasing, and there's definitely things that they could have done better, but for what it's worth, what they were able to do in 1944, was done really well, and all of the actors really put themselves into it, and really, I just wish that more people knew about Lifeboat. And I do think that, especially if you're a Hitchcock fan or you're a fan of older movies, that watching Lifeboat is something that you should do at least once. And if you have seen this film, I'm really interested to hear your personal thoughts on this film as a whole, and maybe what your thoughts are on the depictions of prejudice, how, race and class and gender become a factor here. And I don't know. I think it is a film deserving of its criticisms, but also deserving of its praise. And yes, I do find this to be Hitchcock's most underrated film. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch and or listen to this film. I enjoy being part of your day, and if you enjoyed this film, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to stick around and see more from me, subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments. Not only do I love to hear from you, but it also helps with the algorithm. And if you have any Hitchcock films that you would love to see me cover in the future, let me know in the comments. This month, it's March, it's Women's History Month, so I have a women's history themed video for my Dracula series that I'm doing, and I also have some underrated films that I will be talking about on the channel this month. So I will see you next time, and I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope that you decide to stick around. I'll see you next time.